Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always and forever, by my good friend, my business partner, the one and only, Virginia-based, Shenandoah Valley.
Oh.
Coming at you in this corner, Jason, Neil, Patrick, Harris, Johnson, Yellen.
The Forever had a tone of the Stephen King novel Misery about it, where in the movie Kathy Bates gets Jimmy Durante. I know it's not Jimmy Durante. I forget.
Yeah.
I forget the actor's name, which is rather embarrassing.
James Caan.
But James Caan, thank you.
Jimmy Durante.
That's just
the guy with the big nose and the
Oh, easy. Coming in hot. And she says to him, you know, I'm gonna keep you forever. And so that's why forever has connotations for me.
Are you hoping to get hobbled, or you don't want to get hobbled?
I feel we've come this far. So I was recently in LA. You were recently in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But we have a different jumping off point for today's episode that you thought was going to give us multiple talking points.
Yeah. Well, you know, this has to do with my time in Chicago. I was out there seeing some of our good retail partners, and of course our friends the Nolans, who put together a lovely whiskey dinner, and I poured out
nothing less.
Some bangers, including my last unopened bottle of our Westland 2-year-old from an Oloroso sherry barrel, the heavily peated. So
very nice.
So keep Westland in mind as we continue this conversation.
I'm going to keep Westland in my glass while we continue this conversation too.
There you go. Oh, that's me nosing my Westland as well. But one of the nights that I was there, I was going to Delilah's. So I posted on our private Facebook group. I said, hey guys, I'm going to be in Delilah's in such and such a date. If there's any Nation members out there interested in hanging out, grabbing a pint, grabbing a dram, let's do it. And a number of people came out. I would say there was anywhere between 8 and 10 Nation members that came out and said hello, which was nice, including one I'd never met before, the one and only Chris Hagen, Chris Hagen-Dazs, the Ice Cream Man.
I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by. Oh my, I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by.
There you go.
Yeah.
And how was he as a gentleman of Single Cask Nation?
Oh, he was lovely. He was really nice to talk to learn a little bit about, you know, wanting to know what he does in his life and how he got into whiskey. And, you know, it's funny, part of his story, his story, I think, is one that is shared by many people in that their interest in whiskey grew tenfold, if not more, over COVID. Like, what are you going to do when you're locked at home? I'm just going to...
The other C word.
Yeah, right. Oh, the other C word, yeah. So getting to, you know, hear about some of his whiskey origin story was really cool. The gentleman, Lisa from Stauning Rye, was in from Denmark there, pouring some of his ryes. Mike Miller, of course, was there. Got to spend good time with him. I'm going to do an incomplete Joshua Hatton list.
It is funny, though, because as you've been giving your incomplete Joshua Hatton list, I was thinking, he's name-checking Nation members in Chicago. I should be sure to do that about LA, but I don't want to give an incomplete list. And so I've been going through my tastings, seeing people in my mind. And so, yeah, I'm more nervous about the Joshua Hatton incomplete list than you are. Like, I just think there's going to be the one person who's like, harumph, I got ignored.
Well, that's why
I've just ruined someone's day.
That's why I want to stop there, but then I'm like, but Gil was there, and Eric was there, right? And the list can go on. Some people who didn't even know I was going to be in there, who I saw at our Chicago Jubilees, just showed up, and I recognized their faces from 5 to 8 years ago. I'm like, hey, you guys look like you went to the Jubilee. Like, yeah, of course. Anyway, so back to the ice cream man. On May 2nd of this year, Chris Hagen, the ice cream man, sent us an email. And as has been our tradition as of late, we've been front-loading emails, which I've quite liked. And I wanted to read his email. There's a lot of good points in here.
No time like the present, as they like to say.
So the subject says, "Save the squirrels / filler material for a future podcast." Or padcast, sorry.
Filler sounds pejorative when he uses it.
So he says, "Dear JJ and Jay, it's the ice cream man here, answering your call for listener mail." I love it.
Hey, hello again.
Right? When you come up with these nicknames, you wonder, are these people going to fucking hate it, or are they going to be cool with it? And he's cool with it. So hopefully this will provide useful filler material for a future podcast, so you don't need to revisit the topic of squirrels' separation ever again.
Bless him. Thank you, Chris. Much appreciated.
There you go. He's going to be donating to PETA later, too, in our name, which is quite nice. So he says, "First off, I want to say congratulations on joining Artisanal Spirits.
Oh, cheers.
I couldn't be happier for you. I really loved the episodes featuring Andrew, Kai, and Ewan. Their passion for whiskey is truly palpable, and I can see how this is going to be a great fit." I love that.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Right.
I'm glad that what we see and hear is also coming across in the podcast / podcast when we have these types of interviews / chats. So that's awesome. That makes me really happy.
He goes on, he says, "Speaking of which, I really need to get my hands on that new Ben Nevis." I think he's talking about the one we released in the UK, Europe, Asia, Israel markets. Anyway, he continues. "You've had some great discussions recently on how to grow the American single malt market. Remember I said keep Westland in mind, and you said I'm keeping Westland in my glass?"
Absolutely.
He continues, "I think the answer is ambassadorship at every level. I love what you guys are doing in this area and look forward to future Spirit of Collaboration releases and podcasts featuring the producers. Second, I know the American single malt producers are doing cool stuff as well. For example, Westward has a tasting room at the Portland airport. Over the holidays, we were making a connection, and I was able to enjoy a whiskey flight at 9 a.m.
No, there's no time zones in an airport.
Parenthetical comment, he says, "I was assured by the friendly staff member that, quote, there are no time zones here." And as he says, as my wife and kids looked on in horror. He continues, "Nation members should check it out if they ever find themselves with a layover in PDX. But
I've heard good things about it.
Right, yeah, same here. But lastly, and maybe most importantly, I think it's incumbent upon whiskey enthusiasts to buy American single malt and pour it for our friends. Mm-hmm. I've recently been pouring your peated Westland 9-year-old Pinot de Charente expression for friends, and I'm starting to see them come around to get excited for both Westland and this growing category.
Awesome.
Side note, I'm really glad I was lucky enough to score one of those bottles. It's so good. That's 5 O's.
I was just about to say that. I'm really glad he secured one in the lottery. That was the last time we ran a Westland lottery. So,
yeah, there you and then he asked the question, any thoughts on how the upcoming Sauterne expression compares to it? I mean, let's stop here really quickly. I mean, first off, you've got 2 different cask types. The peated Westland and Pinot de Charente is a single barley variety, heavily peated, and Pinot de Charente, which is this sort of heavy, dark, like pineapple, fruity. I think I mentioned to you before, it's a fortified wine that's fortified with cognac.
Yeah. Yep.
And so you're dealing with earthiness combined with rich, dark fruits. And then with the Sauterne, you've got your 5 malt mash bill. So you got your chocolate malt and your caramel malt, and then your pale malt, and then the 2 other malts that I always forget. Do you know what the 2 other malts are off the top of your head?
One of them's Munich. I can give you
Munich. Yeah, all right.
I can give you the 5 off the top of my head.
There you go. And then the Sauterne cask, right? Which Sauterne is like apricots and nuttiness. Couple those apricots and that nuttiness with the chocolatey quality of their spirit and the bright banana quality of their yeast, and you get this melange of fruits and nuts and chocolates and just an overall richness and flavor.
Ooh la la, melange.
Melange.
The Sauternes has inspired you, and the Pinot de Charente.
Yeah.
This day.
So anybody who's listening who maybe hasn't had a chance to grab the Westland in Sauterne, there's a handful of bottles left
a few remain.
So
yeah, what's launch day? June 26th, just so we always cover our backs. As of June 26th, 2024.
Yeah, very good.
There are a handful of bottles remaining, so please do go ahead and grab them if they're on the website. Sales were wonderfully robust. It's so funny. You sometimes see this where, what did we have? 180, 190 of these bottles on the website. Mm-hmm. And you see like 170 sale, boom, like that.
Yeah.
And then 20 just tick along, right? Folk are either, oh, that must have sold out, or, oh yeah, I heard so many people got that, it must all be gone. And I personally love it when a few remain on the website. I know we covered this in my interview with Bill Thomas, where for his Jack Rose selections, he would love it if he could sell 30% of the cask and save 70%.
Yeah.
I am definitely a 90-10 guy. I would love, I do love selling out 90% of that cask and just sitting on a few bottles. Because we meet people at tastings, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed out on that. No, there's a bottle on the website. Yep. You can grab it right now.
Yep.
And then they do. I like having that opportunity. So, but when they sell out, they sell out, Joshua.
When they sell out, they sell out. And it's nice to hear from Michael Nolan. He had said it's actually kind of nice to see bottles on your website. It's
becomes a destination, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You need a gift.
Exactly. Yep.
Go to singlecastnation.com.
So
you need a special bottle for an event? Go to singlecastnation.com. Oh, that's good. I'm glad Nolan said that. That's pretty cool. Yep. Speaking of Nolan, the only names I will check over here is Bino, Lizarro, and Aaron Krause. We're at multiple events in LA. Very dear friends of Nolan, people who have all traveled together, and so they're always asking about each other. And so I'm just using a moment on the podcast to have everybody say hello to everybody else.
Look at you. You're like, I got to get an incomplete Joshua Hatton list.
No, I was complete. I said I'm going to say 3 names, and I said 3 names, and I'm out of here.
All right, let me finish the Ice Cream Man's email here. And now we're getting to the question part of the email. God, I really did enjoy hanging out with him. Oh, and we ended up buying rounds of drams for everybody, and if I remember correctly, he purchased a Samaroli bottling of Longmorn, if memory serves. Was it Longmorn? It was Longmorn. Anyway, lovely guy. Anyway, I do have another question, and I apologize if it's been addressed at some point.
Yeah, 8 seasons in, it might have been, it might not have been. Always worth revisiting.
Even if you have addressed this, it's such a contentious issue. I thought it would be a good topic to revisit. What topic do you think it is? What's the most contentious, one of the most contentious things in whiskey today?
Certainly cask investments.
Oh, that's definitely contentious. Yep.
If it's in the whiskey drinking world, it could be chill filtration or coloration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Well,
You'd not throw me a bone on either of those two?
the topic is the neck pour.
Oh, well, nobody told me it was the most contentious of all time.
That's true. I said one of the. I didn't say
Yeah.
the
Oh,
most.
gosh.
Yeah.
Neck pores. We're here for it. Gosh, I was just discussing neck pour with somebody literally last week. Oh, boy. Can I tell you, just before he goes into it, because I don't know what he's going to cover here, but do you know what's interesting for me? Is talking to people who are whiskey curious. They're just beginning a journey or dipping a toe or just curious if this is even for them. And you get onto the subject of neck pour and they just look at you like, oh, all whiskey is crazy all the time. Okay, got it. I'm either going to jump into the deep end, unable to swim, or I'm just going to go away and find another hobby. But the neck pour really sets the table for what we do in this hobby.
Who do you think was the first jackass to bring up the topic of neck pours?
I guarantee you could find out. I guarantee you.
It says, looking online, so many whiskey drinkers attribute this effect to oxidation, but I have my doubts. Casks are quite porous, so I'm assuming that oxidation is going to occur slowly in the cask as it matures. And the act of simply popping a bottle, pouring a dram or two, and waiting a couple weeks is going to have very little incremental impact on the whiskey. That said, the phenomenon is very real, and I find the first or second pour often disappoints. My own theory is that it takes a few encounters with a new whiskey to really wrap your head around it. The first couple encounters are filled with tension because the whiskey does not match up to the expectations you may have had for it. Only through multiple encounters are you able to start to enjoy it for what it actually is and stop comparing it to what you wanted it to be. This recently happened with your Longmorn 1999 23-year-old, where it took me a few pours before it really clicked. Now, the challenge is trying not to drink the whole bottle responsibly every time I see in my cabinet. Really curious to get your thoughts on this topic. We're almost done here, Jason. He says, keep up the great work, and I'm really looking forward to trying some of your new releases. Yours truly, Chris the Ice Cream Man Hagen, Chicago, Illinois. P.S. I've attached a PDF of this email for Jason's desktop. And it's here, so I'll forward that to you later. I forgot.
Actually, if you could print that out and mail it to me, I'll add it to my files.
Yeah, not a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. So I'm going to go on record and I'm going to say I think oxidation is very real here, and I think it's very important in this. I think to respond to Chris, I agree wholeheartedly, right? You've got a large volume sitting in cask in some warehouse in some part of the world. Mm-hmm. But you then start carving off smaller and smaller volumes. And those volumes, those smaller volumes, I think then oxidize at increasing rates.
So it's further oxidation.
Correct.
Yes,
Correct.
That's what I was going to say. Okay.
I would then throw my hat in the ring for something else.
All right.
And I will go on record saying bottle shock is real.
I just wrote down, so I have the first thing I wrote down, further oxidation. The second thing I wrote down, bottle shock. Oh, I can't wait. So you continue, and then I want to see what your third one is, because it may be my third one.
Well, for my third one, I was actually going to agree with him that I think personal context is huge in all of this, and so I love the way he described it. So I wasn't going to add to that. I was just going to agree with it. So coming back to the bottle shock, right, there's a lot of movement happening here, and you're talking about if a cask is in a warehouse, it's being pulled out of its row. It's being tipped. It's going through a processor to get into bottle. It's then going into 6-pack, getting packed on a pallet. Then it's maybe going on a boat, or maybe it's going on a plane. Then it's going to the next spot. It's going into an importer's warehouse. It's going across country. It's going into distributor warehouses. It's in and out of hot trucks, right? and then it makes it to a retail store where I think maybe it, unless it's our e-com, right? And then it's sitting in a retailer's warehouse waiting to fulfill an order. But even then, it's only just starting to relax. Then you make the purchase, and either we're shipping it to your doorstep or you're taking it home from a retail store and sitting that on your own shelf. Only then is that bottle starting to relax.
Yeah.
Only then are the molecules in that liquid getting a chance to settle. So there's a large part to that process as well. Then you open, then you start pouring, then you start introducing oxygen to the equation. So yeah, if you're going to get as nerdy as we get, if you're going to pay attention the way we all pay attention, you're going to notice small differences, small changes, because you're alert and you're aware. And so, yeah, I think bottle shock needs significant time for the bottle to calm down and come into its own. So I would throw my hat in the ring for that, on top of neck pour, further oxidation, and personal context.
Well, so here's a perfect example of why I think it's the term neck pour that needs to go away. So our retail bottlings have no liquid in the actual neck. They don't. So the Longmore that the ice cream man mentions here, there was no liquid in the neck for there to be a neck pour. And this is why I think it is those three parts. It's further oxidation as you drain the bottle more, and oxygen will adjust the liquid. That's one. Two, bottle shock for sure. I think that's probably the biggest. I think when people say neck pour, what they're trying to describe is exactly what they're trying to say is exactly what you just described, which was this bottle shock effect. And then I think the third thing is your expectations. I would venture a guess that if someone poured that for you blindly and you left your expectations by the wayside, you might enjoy it more, right? Almost nothing lives up to the billing, right? And right, so there is that, and also, there is advanced billing that we give for all of our bottlings, and we're not the only ones, and that's through tasting notes. And we develop these tasting notes over a long period of tasting these samples, and quite often, people like the ice cream man and anyone else who may be using those tasting notes looking for what we found, they may not find it immediately. And maybe they're finding it, they're tasting that whiskey within the context of other whiskeys. And so there's so many variables. So I think bottle shock is a thing for sure.
And I would add on to what you're just saying there. Look at a tasting as well. If you have the opportunity to pour a dram and spend time with that dram over 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you're sitting in the privacy of your own home. I would argue even the neck pour, when given suitable amount of time, and you could be talking an hour, you could be talking 2 hours. There are people online who write their tasting notes on bottles that they purchase. They talk about, what was this doing when it first came out of the bottle? What was this doing an hour later, 2 hours later?
Resting in the glass.
Only being in the glass, not refilling from the bottle. And so I think that aspect needs to be considered by people as well. And that's where I'm quite proud of this nerdy hobby in which we all engage, or that of sitting quietly with a dram, is our minds are working, right? Yeah. Our mouths are working, our hands are working if we're taking notes here. Like, it's a very involved process, which we love, which we're nerdy about, which we listen to podcasts with other nerds writing in about it. That in itself is very, very, very cool. And I'm glad that we're amongst that community, and I'm glad that we can talk about this in a way where other nerds are going, yeah, that checks out. Yeah, yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
Yep.
It's so cool.
Yeah. So there you go. So Ice Cream Man, thank you again for your email. Thank you for coming out to Delilah's and having some beer and some whiskey. It was absolutely lovely meeting you. Anyone else who wants to send in an email can do so. info@singlecastnation.com. I think we're almost to the point where questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com is going to be fixed. This has been a bear and a half, but until then, info@singlecastnation.com will definitely work. Send your emails in.
Perfect. I would hazard another opinion that Westland is not yet done in today's episode.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But with an eye on the clock, I'll get us into the interview real fast. This was part of my time in Austin. My voice continues to give me trouble in the Austin air. But I sat down with Daniel Whittington, which, as we get into in the early part of the interview, is a very well-known surname in the UK. And I every time I say it, I have to pause for just 1 second because I'm thinking to myself, am I really saying Whittington here? Is this really? I'm in America. I'm really saying Whittington. Like so awesome. So sitting with Daniel Whittington, you may know him from Whiskey Vault, an incredibly popular YouTube channel. You may have heard of him as part of Whiskey Academy. We get into Whiskey Academy and whether or not it's a cult in our conversation today. They had such good humor about it. I really enjoyed my time there. And I have to say, I was on the Wizard Academy campus. It's a series of beautiful buildings. They occupy multiple spots on one Austin hill. And wandering between them is really cool. The views are lovely. Honestly, man, I had such a blast being there and meeting so many cool people.
So jealous I couldn't make it out.
Next time, you'll get a chance.
There you go.
And so, we talk independent bottling here. We talk about the future. And pay attention, because I will leave the interview hanging. But go forth, enjoy this conversation with Daniel Whittington, Whiskey Academy, Austin, Texas. Hello, Daniel Whittington.
Yes, hello.
I have to ask you, are you familiar with the story out of England, English lore of Dick?
Of course I am.
Whittington.
And his cat.
Yes.
And the bells singing, Dick Whittington, come back. Dick Whittington, come back.
Right.
And and I was raised on that story.
So I was going to ask you, how old were you when you were first introduced to Dick Whittington?
Before I can even remember. I have 7 versions of the children's book story.
Oh, wow.
On my library my grandfather collected.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And then, obviously, I think that was, 14th century?
And then he was the longest running mayor of London in the history of London.
Do you know if that's your lineage?
It is, but he didn't have any kids. That one guy, I don't think he had kids.
Okay.
So we're part of the line. I mean, the Whittington Castle's in Gloucestershire.
Okay.
Right.
Nice.
And we have the Whittington chimes. Do you know an interesting thing about that? Did you know where the Whittington chimes came from? Mm-mm. So they're played on any grandfather clock has Westminster chimes and often has the Whittington chime option.
Oh, interesting.
And it was one of the first known instances of a political song. Like a backing track for like the politician to walk onto the stage to. Yeah, he had these chimes. They were like custom chimes.
I'd love to see you walk into classrooms with that playing.
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, well done. Now, as a musician, that was beautifully executed. I'm glad
Probably
I wasn't
not accurate.
I'm glad I wasn't the one attempting that. So where to begin? When Daniel Whittington walks into a room in the spring of 2024, how does he define himself?
Oh, geez. That's a tough question, man. I'm still trying to figure that out.
You're welcome.
Someday I'll know. The ground's pretty shifting. I would say right now I'm a father of 2 awesome boys.
Nice.
And my oldest is getting closer and closer to graduating high school. And so right now that's my primary focus, and what that's led me to do is make sure that I'm planted here in Austin, Texas, until my youngest, who's 13, graduates in 5 years. Right. And then after that, who knows? But while I'm here, and for the last 11 years, I've been for the last 3 years, but I've been at Wizard Academy for 11 years. The last
totally
3 as
not
chancellor.
A cult.
Totally not a cult. And out of Wizard Academy, I found a whiskey marketing school and the Psalm School, and then I helped found the 2 whiskey YouTube channels, and helped found a distillery and an independent bottling company, and then ended up randomly on the internet as evidently an influencer. I didn't mean to.
Yeah,
but,
don't become an influenza.
No. That's a very different skill set. I think right now, strangely, because I view my role as, I think there's a certain point when you start to get in looking at legacy, and usually it happens at like retirement age, you know, but I'm always thinking about, what do I want my mark on the world to be? Like, what do I want to leave behind in my wake? And it's always comes back to community. So if I had to redefine what I do, it's building community. And right now it's around business education and whiskey education. And, I just love when you get a bunch of cool people around doing cool things.
It is interesting when first of all, listeners can understand why I put the question upon you instead of trying to lead with an introduction that summed you up.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because it's difficult, and you did a lovely job.
Yeah.
When you then bring yourself around community, obviously the whiskey tribe here in the US, and I'm sure further afield, is synonymous with you and Rex. Am I right in saying that? And you built that. How did that come about? What were you hoping for?
It was an accident. I always use the analogy that we sort of stumbled around in the woods because we showed up and started doing a YouTube channel. Its only goal for me was to provide context for people who were trying to see what we do at Whiskey Marketing School, and to provide context for the Psalms we were training on, like, here's how you can talk about whiskey and not be a jerk. And not make people feel ashamed or embarrassed about what they do or don't know. And Rex came on the channel because he wanted to use it as a test case to show his clients, because he had a video production company shooting commercials and client videos for small businesses. He'd been trying to get them on YouTube for years. And so he was like, I'm just going to do it with Daniel. We'll show them. Here's what I'm talking about. And so we just sort of didn't really think much of it. This is what we're going to do. And then it exploded. And I mean, partly because we do know what we're doing when it comes to communications and marketing, but we also had like 80% luck to the 20% we know what we're doing. Right. My analogy has always been, Rex and I were stumbling around in the woods, and we found some train tracks. And we were like, hey, let's build a train on this. And that train track was, the definition of good whiskey is whiskey you like the way you like to drink it.
There you go.
Right? That was our line that we sort of started with. And like, let's build a train on this thing.
Yeah.
And then we were building it. And we got down to the last bolt, and we tightened it, and we stood up to stretch, and we turned around, and there was like 5,000 people on the train.
That's wild.
And we were like, holy shit. Now what? And they're all looking at us like,
that's the question.
Where are we going? And so we were like, we don't know. So we sat down real quick and like, let's just go down the train tracks. And so we just turned on the train, started rolling on the train tracks. And a lot of people, some of the things, I mean, we didn't go with no plan, but our plans that we came up with, here's what we're going to do. By the time they came to fruition, were actually what we did. We're always very different from what we intended. We started out, we're going to do this thing.
Sure.
Well, crap. And by the way, I didn't ask about how cussing goes on your podcast. No, is it fair game?
A fair game.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an adult audience.
Yeah, that's fair. It's like, oh crap, this is not the. So we're rolling on the train. Everyone's like, yay. And we're like, yay. And then we look out the front, and we're like, the train's going left. So we build a target and we huck it out in front onto the train tracks to the left. And then the train hits it and we go, we did it. We achieved our goal. And everyone behind is like, congratulations, well done, guys. And then I was looking at the window. I'm like, hey, the train's going right now. So we build a target. So it wasn't like most people build a target and then they build all the infrastructure and then they work their butts off to try to hit the target.
Absolutely.
We just sort of kept throwing targets in front of a moving train.
Interesting.
And then we would hit them and then we would take credit for it.
Well, you have to at that point.
Yeah, just be like, And I would say the only thing we were really good at was naming the target and throwing it down in the right place. But the momentum and the power and the energy was not us. It was 100% this massive community that just sort of built up behind us.
So give us an example of what would you throw out the train and then
the first huge one, let's build a crowdsourced whiskey distillery together. And actually, that was the second one, because the first one was, let's start a Patreon.
Oh, okay.
And we'll use the money to help, fund this thing. And then that got, really out of hand. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm going back further, because the first one was, everyone was like, you guys need a Facebook group where we can all talk to each other. Because at that point we had 100,000 people. And we were like, And then one day a Facebook group started called the Whiskey Vault channel. And before we could stop it, it had 5,000 people in it. And we were like, crap, guys, no, you can't do that. This is okay, fine, we'll start a group. So we started a group, and that group now has 40, 50,000 people in it.
My word.
And so that was the first of okay, fine, we'll throw out this quote target, and then everyone filled it. But that was their idea. We started the Patreon. We thought it would get us a couple grand a month. It hit 30 grand a month. Jeepers. We were like, well, shit, that's not a good look to just keep that money. So let's do something. What can we do?
Yeah.
And the idea was a crowdsourced whiskey distillery.
So again, right, my mind was thinking about that we're talking about conventional crowd surfing thinking, but I was thinking, you thought, let's start a distillery and now let's use this group. And instead the group was like, here's all this money. And you were like, let's do a distillery.
Yeah, it was both. Yeah. We had, so we were already in motion on a distillery, but the goal for that distillery was to be a resource for the SOM school.
Okay.
We had no intention of being a full-fledged production distillery.
Okay.
It wasn't until we got all that money that we were like, maybe we should relook at this thing and turn it into something with real legs. And they said, sure, let's do it. And it wasn't just, I don't know that I would call it crowd-funded, because it was their money that helped us start it, but it wasn't presented as a crowdfunding.
And that's what I was getting to, right?
Yeah, a crowdfunding is like Kickstarter. Give us all your money, we'll take it, we'll start a distillery, you'll get some perks.
Exactly.
This was more, we want you along for a journey. You're going to help us decide everything. At the early days, they voted on the style of lamps we hung on the outside of the building. They voted on the paint color. They voted on the name of the tasting room. They voted on the name of the first thing we ever distilled, which was a single malt whiskey. Okay. That's the first thing we ever ran on our own still, which was a 25-gallon still and fit on this table. And they named it the Single Malt of Magnificence, which we shortened to Single Mom.
That's awesome.
And so they've been involved in the whole process. So my whole life is of this world is thanks to everybody who showed up when we thought we were doing something interesting, and we're like, you know what, that is kind of interesting. And that's been, what a gift.
And so what kind of time frame are we talking here? How long is this journey
I started the SOM school in 2015.
Okay.
First class was September 2015. The whiskey distillery opened in 2018, August.
Okay.
So it's been, 6 years? 5 years? 6
Yeah,
6
5
years.
and a half or so. Yeah.
5.5, yeah. Crawling
Approaching
on 6 years.
Yep.
That's it. That's a lot of things to happen in
Absolutely,
6
yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm no longer with them. In October of last year, we finally got to the point where the Wizard Academy and the Whiskey Marketing School and the Whiskey Vault are all part of a nonprofit.
Yeah, that's good. I was going to ask you about
educational 501c3.
Nice.
And one of the most illegal things you can possibly do is to benefit a for-profit business with nonprofit resources. And we were very serious about drawing the line between those two here. Sure. We never did that. But it was getting grayer and grayer in the mind of the government. And in the mind, even of people like, I've had staff here who've been here for 2 years. They still don't understand how the split works. You know what I mean? And so we finally just decided, like, there were some changes that were already happening in the background. And we decided this is a good opportunity for us to just really go shunk and put a solid wall between those two.
Okay.
And in order to do that, neither of us could participate in the other side. And so... And part of that was also just an energy resource. Both of us were spread so thin. They were like, what's the Bilbo quote? I feel like butter spread over too much toast.
Oh, nice. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's how we both felt, And so on that split in October, I went, and we announced it in November. I went all in on the nonprofit side. So I'm Whiskey Marketing School, Wizard Academy, and Whiskey Vault YouTube channel. And then Rex took over the distillery and the Whiskey Tribe community.
Okay.
So now Rex is the patriarch of the Whiskey Tribe community.
Okay.
I am just a guest, one of the members of the group.
Okay.
But I have no say or often no knowledge of what's happening over there. I find out at the same time everyone else does. I have no inside knowledge of what's going on over there.
There you go. So the other day you gave this beautiful presentation. I came here to Austin laughing, obviously, about going to the Wizard Academy.
Yeah, right.
And telling my wife, right, I got to Austin Airport and in Waze, I entered Wizard Academy thinking Waze would be like, new directions, who dis? And it was like, yep, here you go, there's your directions. Yeah. Wizard Academy is a real thing with a real footing.
Yeah.
And I never knew that. I never understood that.
The whiskey world has no overlap with Wizard Academy. And it's a very weird thing. I've got students who have been going to Wizard Academy for 15 years who don't even know we have a whiskey school.
Right.
And I've got whiskey students who don't realize that we're not a whiskey school.
Exactly.
Right. Now, Wizard Academy is a business school for entrepreneurs. We take things that naturally talented people do intuitively, and we teach you how to do it on purpose. And our emphasis is on marketing, communications, and ad writing, but we cover all aspects of being a small business owner.
And the wizard comes from?
Roy Williams was the founder of this entire property. And he was wrote 3 New York Times bestsellers called The Wizard of Ads. And he founded this to educate small business owners. Yeah. So we didn't even have a bottle of whiskey on the campus until after I got here in 2013. The school had already been going for a decade.
Look at that.
They were wine drinkers. We have a wine, what do you call it?
Cellar?
That's the word I was looking for. We have a wine cellar. I started going like, hey, have you guys ever thought about doing whiskey? And then we started drinking whiskey, and I started teaching whiskey just to the students, just for fun. Like, we're finished with class. We had dinner. Let's go do a whiskey tasting in my office. And then that eventually became the whiskey school. But that divide is pretty strong. I mean, it's getting better. We're getting better in the whiskey school about talking about Wizard Academy. And so we're now I think we've graduated 200, a little over 200 Psalms.
Wow.
Which is not very many for 8 years. We've been going for 8 years.
Okay.
We've only graduated 200 because we only hold 3 classes, level 1s a year. And so I'm not counting the ones who've gone through level 1, 2, 3. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah.
And of those 200, only about 30 or 40 of them have moved over into doing Wizard Academy classes, business classes.
Okay.
Yeah. And of that 200, less than 50 came from Wizard Academy.
Wow.
So there's a really weird, it was hard for you to understand. Yeah. It's just as hard for our students to pick up on. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I had a class, and after class I was like, we're going to do a whiskey tasting in this room over here. And we walked in, and one of the guys who's been at this place for 8 years was like, what the hell do you have all this whiskey for? And I was like, man, do you not pay attention to the emails? Never mind.
Well, I also have to say, driving south and southwest, I believe, for 25, 30 minutes from the airport.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't know what I was driving towards.
Yeah.
And here I am in hill country.
Yeah, you are.
And what you've got here, what was built, 15 years ago?
We started, we're constructing all the time.
Right.
But started 20 years ago.
right? And there's the tower, which is so cool, and the art is so cool, and the connection to Don Quixote is so cool. But then walking around, the artworks are so cool. The chapel.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with whiskey, but could you talk about the chapel for just a
the
second?
chapel was the first thing we built when we got this campus.
I think this is so cool.
It's called Chapel Dulcinea. And before we built the school to make money, we built a wedding chapel on the hill overlooking the valley.
That's amazing.
And we immediately made it free to the community.
So cool.
And it's now still free. We've made some changes because it has to pay for itself. So now Monday through Thursday is free, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday you pay $500.
Which
that's it
for what it is, where it is, how it looks.
Yep,
it is so cool.
And we do about 1,000 weddings a year there because you get an hour and a half time slot.
Wow.
And you can do what you like with that time. And so because we believed two things. One, you should always give from lack, not from plenty. It means more. And two, that you shouldn't have to be rich to have an amazing wedding.
Beautiful.
And so we will always keep the majority of the wedding slots at that space free.
Man.
And
It's really beautiful. I really loved sitting there and talking with everybody there and part of the tour. It is funny, right? Because when we got to the room, there was a tote bag, Wizard Academy, and then on the back, and I joked about this in the start of the interview, totally not a cult.
Totally not a cult.
I now feel like, now that I've been here and I've drunk the Kool-Aid, I'm
maybe
kind
it is.
of talking about this place differently than I did previously. But I think part of that is, and Joshua and I have this, and talking to other independent bottlers, you get to experience this. When you go to a distillery and you experience that
everything.
Space, those people, the work ethic, the belief system, you internalize that.
Yeah.
And when we talk about Westland, we love everything about Westland. When we talk about VDC, Virginia Distillery Company.
Yeah, because when you think of Westland, you picture people, not bottles of whiskey.
Exactly.
When you drink Lafroig, you picture a face of a human being, not a bottle of whiskey.
Exactly.
And there will be no better Lafroig than sitting inside the entry door to Warehouse 1.
Right.
Sitting in a wooden chair. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just that's the magic of whiskey. Is whiskey's not a bottle. Whiskey is human beings. That's what makes it really hard to review whiskey. Because anyone can review whiskey. When you're aware that you're reviewing human beings,
absolutely,
it's much harder.
It completely changes it. And coming here and seeing a campus and speaking to people and hearing about a beautiful chapel that everyone deserves a beautiful wedding. Like, honestly, that gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Like, I really love that notion.
Yeah.
And so when you hear about the Wizard Academy with a vault and 3,000 open bottles, it's easy to, without any context, go, well, that sounds kind of wanky.
Yep.
and then you come and you meet people and you see it and you see what feeds that.
Yes.
You go, shit.
We're not just hoarding a collection of bottles.
These are really cool people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, when I came here, it wasn't to interview you.
No.
Meeting you, listening to you, hanging out with you, hearing the story. I was like, we got to get that guy on the podcast. Yeah. He's a cool dude.
Yeah, thank you. It's mostly the hat,
and the beard. Let's not miss the beard. And so with a bit of that background into the podcast for our listeners here, you are clearly a man with a finger and a pulse of whiskey, writ large, American whiskey, blending, sourcing. Yeah. And we say it along with Dave Schmier, sourcing is not a crime.
Nope.
Right? And so can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing right now? Where's your focus in whiskey right now?
I think those might be two different things with some Venn diagram overlap.
Checks out.
I think what I'm seeing in whiskey is the same thing I saw in the music industry, which was both terrifying and awesome simultaneously. Because my background was, I was 2 decades as a studio and touring musician. And I always taught on independent music industry when I would, travel. And the great dissemination of information or access to fans,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It used to be, early days radio and labels decided what went to the radio stations. Radio stations were just an extended arm of the labels, and they would do tours with the people on the label. Like, here's the 8 bands they're touring, right? This is Temptations era, and right? And then you get into like, Rolling Stone and reviewers and disc jockeys have a voice, and they become curators.
Nice.
Right? Just curators of amazing music. But they're still gatekeepers, and the labels still get to decide who they curate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then we hit the internet, and everything changed, and all of a sudden, there were no more gatekeepers. If you could find people who felt the way you did or loved what you were doing, you could get right to them.
Yep.
And that was amazing. But also, holy shit, the amount of new bands that show up every month is terrifying, right?
Yeah. Like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah. And so I think American whiskey specifically, but I think this also applies to single malt in Scotland, and it's starting to apply to the growing movement of distilleries in Ireland, is the same exact path, right? So you got, who gave you whiskey? Well, the retailers, but who decided what they could carry? Well, the owners, the Diageos, the DLCs, or the IDL, and then all of a sudden, hang on a second, we get a world where people get a little bit more access, and distilleries start to get a little bit of a voice.
Yeah.
And they can start to be like, the smaller brands, the William Grants could be like, we have these 5 brands and so you end up with this. And then there's an era where people start talking about whiskey, and the internet introduced us to curators, bloggers and YouTubers and retail curators and right. And I would argue that IB was ahead of that curve. Independent bottlers were ahead of that curve. Independent bottlers are a curator. They're a disc jockey of the whiskey world, right? They're a radio guy.
Yeah, I like that.
And it's their job to wade into the chaos, pick a few bands you really need to hear, and then present them to you.
Right.
Check out this new single from Westland, right?
Yeah.
And but now we have the world where all producers, if they want to, and they have the ability, can reach straight to the people who can drink their whiskey. And while that's amazing, it allows people to have, everybody to have a voice, and craft can explode, which it is. It's also, as a consumer, terrifying and exhausting. And you walk into a store, it used to be a half an aisle was whiskey, and now it's 3 aisles of whiskey, and they still are turning away 2/3 of the things that are available in the market or more. And so I think in the industry right now, if you're viewing it as a maker, it's overwhelming and terrifying and feeling like there's no hope and you can't get your voice to be heard. If you're viewing it as a consumer, it can be a little overwhelming and feel like I can't keep up with all the good things in the world, and there's never enough time to try all the good whiskey. And that's true.
Yeah.
And so I think where that leads me to right now is what I actually give a shit about, which is more than ever, the world needs curators. Right? And some of those curators will be bloggers and YouTubers, and some of those curators will be parent brands who buy up a handful of pocket distilleries as opposed to a Diageo who's just pulling in things to a portfolio. And there's a difference between those two, And independent bottlers, I think, are the new, I think 2 things in the future: independent bottlers in America specifically, independent bottlers and blenders. And I think that's the future. And that's what I care about, independent bottling and blending. And I think the role of blenders is just to show people you can create really magical things from all these components, which Scotland and Ireland has known forever. And the role of independent bottlers is to be honest curators of what good things are happening in the world.
Yeah. Which I think is then back to that getting out there, meeting those people, supporting those
relationship
people,
and connection,
community.
Again, whiskey is second.
Exactly, and so you seem to have a passion there and an understanding there, given what Scotland established with independent bottling without really trying. It just
just because that you guys started with merchants,
right?
And that was like, no Highland guy was going to try to figure out the merchant, like open a shop in Glasgow. It's like, no, it's enough for me to get my shit down to Glasgow.
Right.
That needs to be someone else's problems. But actually they sold it the same way they sold all goods from their farm, because it was farm produce.
Yes, correct.
And so no one really considered you could start a shop with, like, no one started a shop with other farm produce, right? And so the merchants sold the grain, the merchants sold rugs and furniture. They also sold whiskey barrels, and, you know what I mean, and wine, and yeah. So there were purveyors, but America didn't quite have the same history.
So I'm curious, given that America did, and Josh and I have talked about this and interviewed various people on this very topic, but given, yeah, please add to what has been said previously. But given that America had this own tradition of casks going into warehouses and then coming out with new labels and new stories attached to it, do you... Maybe this is maybe an unfair question for you, but do you think there's some undoing to be done in America?
Oh, yeah. That's not unfair. That's the world that's the landscape.
Okay.
Because you can find, like, right now, one of the things you always see people bitching about is, like, someone's sourcing a bunch of whiskey and then slapping a historical name on it to just sort of wrap in history and tradition into a brand that's 3 months old.
Yep.
Like, they were doing that in the 1800s in America. There are records of battles over getting to use people's names.
Oh, wow.
Because the public recognized that this name had history, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's early on. That wasn't post-prohibition. We've been doing that. We've been fighting that fight since the beginning.
Interesting.
And so we have a very long history of attaching fake history or a history that you don't own, right? I love Michter's, and Michter's is great, but their history is a history they purchased, right? As far as, like, not their recent history and the whiskey they're making, that's theirs. They own that.
Yep.
But the early beginnings of Michter's is one of the oldest continuing made whiskey. Yeah, but not by the people who are doing it right now. It's not the most continuously owned brand in all of the world, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so, I have no problem with that. But that is, as an independent bottler, that creates a very unique problem, which is the result, the fruit of that worldview was that everyone's standard business model was, let's just source and rebrand and create our own vanity brand.
Yes.
And we'll find history, and we'll find we'll go look at the history books of this zip code by my city and discover that, like, 200 years ago, some dude got arrested for illegal moonshine. And then we're going to name our whole brand after that guy. No one even knows if his family members are still alive or what he did other than that. But it's in his honor. And then go, right? And then what are you releasing? Oh, well, it's Bardstown, you know. Yeah. Which, again, I love
Sourcing
Bardstown
is not
whiskey.
a crime.
But, and so on the maker side, you have all these producers who that's just how you do it.
Yeah.
And no one considers, like, hey, maybe either don't bother, actually build your own legacy, or two, maybe be an independent bottler and highlight other people's legacies. And then on the consumer side, your whole history is barrel picks.
Yeah, right.
We've built an entire story of, like, if you want something unique, it's barrel picks. You barrel pick this and barrel pick that. Yeah. And so they all look at independent bottlers as, like, oh, it's just a barrel pick. It's like, well, no. And you're like, well, is it one barrel? Yes. Did you pick it? Yeah. So it's a barrel pick. No, it's not what it. Yeah.
We have battled for all 13 years of the company. Bottled by and bottled for.
Yeah.
And Joshua has always stuck to his guns on bottled by and never bottled for.
Yes.
Our bottle, our label.
Yes.
And then us telling the story of that producer.
But it's a pain in the butt, isn't it? And then because of all these people sourcing and not telling anybody, or sourcing and making up a history, the consumer has that to fight with. Yeah. And so if you're like, well, did you make this? You're like, no, we bought it from Westland. And they're like, so you're sourcing. It's like, well, but...
Yeah, we have used that curating word. And we had the curating word come to us from the Nation.
Yes.
Which for me is the best place for it to come from.
Yeah.
And so a chap in a bar, LA, was saying, look, there's so many voices in this world.
Yes.
I listen to yours because you're bringing me stuff that is consistently top quality.
Yeah, you're curating.
And I trust you.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Right? So we're not sourcing.
Nope,
we're
you're curating. Oh, man, I love that. That's going to go on the website.
Brilliant. Yeah. Totally not a cult. Which, if you take that to Glasgow, will take on a different form.
Yeah, that's real.
So I want to ask you, because you've brought up blending. I definitely want to ask you about blending. But I've got somebody in front of me who teaches marketing classes.
Yeah.
And I think I know the general way that you'll answer this.
Okay.
But I also know you'll give me something that I'm not expecting.
Pizzazz.
And so we, as consumers, as whiskey geeks, often talk about whiskey marketing.
Yes.
While looking down our noses.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And we're being fed stories of Viking lineage, not to pick any one brand, or pre-prohibitionists.
Yeah.
Not to pick any one brand.
Yeah, for family history, lineage.
Right.
Wait a minute, hang on.
Right. And so I think as whiskey consumers, we've become a bit jaded to whiskey marketing. And so my general understanding of what I think you'll say is, well, that's bad marketing. Is that?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
But
you still teach marketing,
I want to add some clarity
right?
to that,
right?
I think.
Right.
And I'll give you my pain point in the same, because I feel the same way about most whiskey marketing as you do. Mm-hmm. Marketing, real marketing is messaging. Mm-hmm. A lot of people use marketing to mean advertising. Right? But to me, advertising is how you deliver a message, and marketing is what you have to say. I split them apart that way, right? Most marketers, they're looking for, how do we get attention? How do we get attention? How do we get attention? And also, how do we get credibility? And then 3, how do we not offend anyone? Those are 3, right? And in a world where you're trying to get attention, not offend anybody, and all of those, what you end up with is the path of least resistance and a little bit of the fudging of the truth, just to gloss over it a little, to make it a little easier to package and sell. And so people are used to finding the emperor has no clothes over and over and over
That's well said.
and over. And that's infuriating at the same way that makers get frustrated with lying sourcing producers. Same thing. The world is full of shitty marketing or lazy marketing or fearful marketing. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Yeah. We got to take away that powerful thing that we just said, because what if someone gets upset with us, In the real world, all marketing is, in my brain, is getting the story out there, right? And I hear the same sentences in distillers, and craft distillers especially, and really any distiller, that I heard in music. Well, if you just create quality songs, the audience will find you. The song will speak for itself. That's not how that works.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, it's like, no. I don't know if you realize this, but in all of the levels of whiskey analysis, listening's not one of them. So, unless you've developed some sort of synesthesia but good marketing simply amplifies the powerful story that was already there. That's it. It just amplifies the powerful story. And the problem we have with marketing is that most of the time, the story that's there isn't great.
Yeah.
Or the story they choose to amplify sucks. Now, as a someone who consults and helps write marketing for people, my biggest frustration is that the real story is always so much more powerful than the story the agency tended to come up with.
Yeah, right.
Right? And so when you find these small craft brands and you hear the story the agency wrote for them, that's like 70% true and 30%, look over here, look over here, look over here, don't look over there. And then you go meet them.
Yeah, right.
And you get them to tell their story to you. And it had to do with like quitting a marketing or an agency or a software company because they'd always, and this is their dream. And they took from their kids' college fund and they cashed it in and they learned this knit and grit and just like elbowing their way through. And they make like that story is the most human story that we've been writing and telling archetypal adventures of since all time. Yeah. And I always sit down with those people and finish by going, why won't you guys tell that story? That's a great story. Yeah. You didn't need 1800s moonshiner you never met and isn't related to you to get me to drink your whiskey. You just needed to tell your story.
I bet they never knew they could.
Well, most people don't think their story is that powerful. That's the nature of human beings, right? And I'm going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to go there. I'm going to quote Doctor Who.
You're in a safe place. Quote Doctor Who.
There was an episode where the bad guy has killed a whole bunch of like the poor people in the town. And he says some version of like, yeah, I killed all those people, but they were all unimportant. And Doctor Who says, interesting, in all my billions of years of travel, I have yet to meet an unimportant person.
That's so good.
Right? And that's how I feel about these craft distilleries is they walk into the world and we all have imposter syndrome. We all think everyone else has it figured out and everyone else knows what we're doing. And we're afraid to speak up because what if they realize that we don't belong in this group and we shouldn't be in this room? And then they start talking and it's like, no, you are a magical creature. And what makes you magical is how you're broken and how you're flawed and how you did it wrong. Right. That's actually the most magical part. The fact that you like correctly used a proof tool and understood how to get power to your still, like that's boring as shit. But the fact that like you couldn't afford a forklift for a year and you figured out how to use like an engine mechanic hoist to like move barrels around a room, that's the way in which we're broken and screwed up. That's the story we should be talking about.
I'm so pleased you say that. We just recently had Jane Bowie and Denny Potter on the podcast. Yeah. And the two of them leaving Makers to go it alone and them working out what does the budget allow for? Yeah. What does the budget not allow for? What cracks can we cover just with our own noses and our own palates? And so that's what they talked about on the podcast. Yeah. And so to know that that's of interest. That's of value.
Yes.
That's not just another marketing story. Not. The other thing, and I've actually had people talk to me about that episode as I've been going out and about. And what's interesting is they're talking about the places where they're stretching the budget.
Yeah, or bootstrapping things up. Like, let's make that meal last for 3.
Right? And they're on the hook for $50 million.
Yeah.
And so to know that $50 million doesn't get you all the things you need in a distillery. Oh, my God,
right? Isn't that terrifying?
That my stomach drops to my heels.
Like, and I think that's the difference. Shit. Those two things, like in the smaller craft, and that would, anybody starting up, you say, and you didn't, but if you think cutting corners, you're thinking of someone who's just like, nah, fuck it.
Yeah, right.
But what's actually closer is skipping meals. No one would go to a college student who only ate one ramen noodle pack because he couldn't afford any other meals and then be like, you got to quit cutting corners. And then he's like, what corners? I didn't cut any corners.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, you're skipping meals. Yeah.
So thank you for indulging me.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the marketing side. I do try to be charitable, and I do try to see it from the other side.
Yeah.
And I like what you say on it. Also want to talk about blending.
Yes.
Passion for blending, flavors. We're talking to more and more people. We had Chris Riesbeck on here from Found North.
Yeah. Oh, man, I just reviewed one of their bottles.
Right.
It was so good.
So they're talking about the world of blending.
Yeah.
We followed that with James Saxon.
Oh, of course. Fucking campus box.
James Saxon was just on the Whiskey Academy campus.
Yes.
And I missed him.
Yeah. By like an hour or so. Yeah.
It's insane. And in an upcoming episode, we talked to Irene Tan.
Yeah.
About blending and the work.
He's
she just left
like 15 feet away from us right now. Huh?
Yep. And that's a great interview that I highly, highly recommend. But for you were Crowded Barrel.
Yeah.
And you were working on Jackalope,
Yeah, I was the blender.
right?
Yeah.
Which I believe has got some good traction in whiskey circles.
It really did, yeah.
So the open-ended question for you to run with is, what's your process? What are you looking for?
Oh, man. Okay,
how
so
do you
there's
put it all
two for
together?
me. And that's the one thing I miss about leaving Crowded Barrel is I truly love blending. It's closer to songwriting than any whiskey production process I've ever done. And I was a
Joshua is loving
musician
this
for
interview.
20 years, right? And so to find something that feels closer to musician world, blending to me is very close. And so mechanically, blending can be really overwhelming when you're working with. The first blend I worked on only had 3 distilleries involved, and it was the first blend of Texas distilleries. And it was Iron Root, Balcones, and Andalusia. And that was a little easier because, limitations inspire creativity. Everyone thinks a blank page is the dream. That's the worst nightmare, right? Because you sit in front of a blank page and say, hey, write something good. Like, well, shit.
Horrible.
Yeah. But if I say, hey, here's a page, here's a picture, the theme is this, it needs to be 600 words in the style of Agatha Christie. And you're like, done and go, right? And so when someone says, hey, blend, you've got Iron Root, you've got Balcones, you've got Andalusia, here's what those 3 taste like, ready, go. That's actually pretty simple.
Nice.
And simple's wrong, but it's so much easier. It doesn't make you feel like you're going to die. Like, oh, crap. But this one, the Jackalope, I started with a little bit more. We had 8 barrels of 15-year-old single, I call single grain. America calls light whiskey.
Which I love.
Yeah.
Absolutely love.
And it was beautiful. And I had 3 barrels of Balcones, and I had a barrel of Real Spirits, which is the distilling arm of Real Ale Brewing in South Texas.
Oh, okay.
And I knew what all of them tasted like, and they were all beautiful. And so my method is always to do what I think is a base, what I think is going to hold the body, and then figure out what I think is going to be the sort of secondary impact, and then to find what I call the third gravitating body, and like the little sparkle of something that's unexpected but ties it all together, and gives you a little bit of I didn't see that coming, but that's perfect, like a jalapeno on top of a sushi roll. Like that should not work, but holy crap, it works.
I want to eat it right now.
Yeah. And but in the process of blending, what you always find, which I truly love, is never has it ever worked out that way for me. I start with what I think is going to be the base and what I think can hold things. I start creating, 24 variations on thirds or fourths or eighths or 20ths of these things. I created like 20 versions of the Balcones barrels alone to blend with the other things. And then I created a single dump of the 8 barrels of light whiskey just because I was like, let's get volume out of that. And then I played with that. And what I found by the time I was done is that light whiskey was the second smallest percentage. It actually just became the binder for a base of Balcones and a sparkle of Real Spirits. I would never have imagined that, but that's how it worked. And so what I would say the process of blending for me that I really love is I want to blend to really just crawl across all the senses. And I don't want any one thing to be shouting at you while the rest of them get buried.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that the Jackalope, if you're looking for Orchard House.
Yeah,
no, that's good. Jackalope is just going to take Orchard House out back and beat the shit out of it and then smoke a cigarette.
in a classic Texan way.
Yeah, but so like it's punchy and it's heavy and it's big, but I like that from Texas whiskey. So I was aiming for big, huge, boisterous, the way that people like Ardbeg or you know.
Oh, for sure.
And so if you drink Jackalope, you're gonna be like, this isn't delicate and all, but it's like, no. If you knew the components, this is actually really balanced. But no, I'm looking for something where nothing really shouts and makes room for other things. And I think of it like a band, right? Yeah. Like no one wants a band where it's a solo drummer with some backing artists. You want a band. You want the bass to be where it belongs. You want the drum kit to be where it belongs. You want the keys to be in the right place. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I actually, my whole whiskey career, I've found that I end up having to, I do tasting notes the way that I mix music. And so when I smell whiskey and taste whiskey, my brain thinks EQ. And I see EQ spectrums and EQ bands.
Absolutely.
And then I have to translate that into whiskey words and whiskey chemistry. And so when I blend, I do the same thing. I blend and I think too many mids.
Yeah.
Or too many highs. Or it's too bassy. And then I don't say that out loud because it makes me sound crazy. But I'll say, oh, okay, this is too oily, too viscous. To me, that's the mids. Oil is in the mids, right? All the oil is mids. And to me, too ethanol forward or too peaty or too that's all highs, or to me too tannin and too oak and too that's all base, or too sherry,
of course
that can be, that's bassy to me, right? And so like those things they just all have to blend correctly the way I would mix EQ as a sound man at a concert. That's my system.
I think it makes perfect sense, and I'm not a musician. I'm sure Joshua is listening to this interview. It makes perfect sense.
Is he a musician?
And he is a musician.
I didn't know that. What does he play?
He's bass.
Oh, fuck yeah. Bass is what no one gives acknowledgement to, but all the musicians want to be.
Right. He's been in bands his entire life.
Oh, that's great.
And so I think this resonates. I think
we need to start an IB band.
Oh, my God. He's all in. He's all in. He's hearing this in the future, and he's all in.
Yeah, Josh, I've got, like here at my house, I can bring you an Ashdown 410 and a 1967 Fender P bass with a jazz neck in my garage right now, and we can just start rocking.
We're out of here on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Firstly, Jason, thanks to you for going down to Austin to speak with Daniel and to a few others, right? You were with Balcones. That was our last episode, and we'll have a few more conversations coming up this season from your time down there. It's funny. I met Daniel some time ago. Christ, I think it was before COVID. And I was at Irene Tan's shop in Canterbury, Connecticut. And she was doing a charitable event, and he was there, and I got to spend a bit of time with him, and we're talking whiskey, and mostly whiskey. What I loved about this interview is I had no idea that he was a musician. He had no idea that I was a musician. And so as he's going on and he's talking about blending and thinking about that from a sound engineer's standpoint of bringing in the various levels of bass and drums and guitar and just, really what he's talking about is what every good blender does is creating a balanced product. And I love that. I love that he can look at blending a whiskey from that standpoint, but also reviewing a whiskey from that standpoint, from that music standpoint. Is the singer's voice too loud? Whatever the case may be, he's looking for that balance the same way he looks for balance in music. I just thought that was super cool and a fascinating way of approaching whiskey.
Well, and I think in a rather interesting, it's serendipitous, and yet it ended up not being serendipitous. It echoes James Saxon of Compass Box, who we just recently had in an episode. While I was off in Waco interviewing Balcones for a recent episode, James Saxon was on the Whisky Academy campus talking with Daniel and Irene. Yeah. And by the time I returned from Balcones, James had headed off to 7 Grand Austin to do a tasting. And I already had my own tasting scheduled for that night. And so, gosh, we're talking in similar ways. We're thinking in similar ways. He's even on site, but we just miss each other. It was a thing and a half. My little bit of a takeaway, obviously, is Whisky Academy is not a cult. It can be a cult. It says on my canvas shopping bag that they gave me when I got there. But what I really loved, and we covered in the interview, was you hear Wizard Academy, and I made this joke, right? I put Wizard Academy into Waze at Austin's International Airport, And it gave me directions to the Wizard Academy, right? It's not just how people are internally referring to it.
Yeah.
But the fact that once you get there, the wizard comes from a series of books,
Yes.
right? And I thought it took just a little bit of the pressure off of, you know, who are these wizards and what have they got to do with whiskey and why are they in charge of some programs for whiskey? And honestly, on site, it made a whole lot more sense than it did far away. And I really felt like it was... partly my responsibility to communicate my experience in being there, how welcoming people were, how cool the experience was. Some of the art is absolutely off the chain. The whiskey vault itself is exceptional, and Single Cask Nation may have a representative or two inside the vault. So, yeah, just a bit like we were talking early in today's episode.
Yeah.
It was a whiskey nerd type of place. And as people who speak to whiskey nerds and represent whiskey nerds and celebrate whiskey nerds, I loved that aspect of my experience. And at the end of one of the nights, we just sat out, just dramming, just talking whiskey,
There you go.
easy peasy. Nice stuff. So, yeah, cheers to Daniel for the invitation, for the time on site, and for the friendship. You know, he was a really, really good bloke. Look forward to seeing him again in the future.
Beautiful.
With you in tow.
Oh, God, I love that. Jason, have a few things to cover here, I think. We don't have much in the way of news, but I do want to touch a little bit on the recent sale that we did have on our website.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to bring in the paper boy for that. And then there's something in our glass as well that I know we're definitely going to want to talk about. So June 6th at singlecasknation.com. That was this year, 2024. We launched 6 bottlings, which were 2 bourbons, 2 ryes, and 2 American single malts. Not to be confused with 1 bourbon, 1 scotch, 1 beer. It's 2 very different things.
There you go. Still delicious, though.
Still delicious. And on day 1, we sold out of our MGP wheated bourbon.
We did.
And also on day 1, and you kind of alluded to this, you know, in the opening of the podcast, which is we sold a ton of bottles. You know, I think this was, you know, one of the few times on our website where we launched, you know, more than 2 or 3 bottles. Like this was 6 bottles at once.
Yeah, never done that before.
Right. And so it was a lot of liquid going on sale, which is why we're allowed to still have some bottles left. Not everything's sold out, but everything has just a little bit left, right?
Exactly, right. Everything's sold well. That made me very happy. I feel like we're always responding to the nation. We're always listening to the nation. At the same time, the nation is following along and seeing what have we released that we think is of interest? Yeah. Obviously, the wheated bourbon that had that bit of smoke to it from MGP. Discussed that with Ian Sturzman in his recent episode. That's a wild and wacky release. It's certainly checks a box for interesting to see that go first. But then, as we'd said in the tasting video, Wilderness Trail, a distillery that the nation has been asking for. And that is a cracking rye. I was talking about that over in LA. Yeah. This rosewater component, this kind of Turkish delight element to a rye that's very unexpected. Yeah. So, yeah, not to go through all 6, but to stand by the fact that there's something interesting about each and every one of them and something that has us returning to them. And a few remain online, which is terrific. Tickety-boo. 90-10 is in effect.
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly, speaking of that MGP, when I had gotten my bottle, when I first cracked it open, I noticed the smoke was less than I remembered on it. And then I let the bottle sit for about a week, And then I poured another, and then it came on a bit stronger. And then I waited another week, and then it was back to where it was with the sample. So again, I do think bottle shock is a thing.
And it was coming back from Austin when I was telling you, like I included it in a tasting. I told the story about limited smoke.
Yeah.
There was the sample. We wrote our notes. We spent time with it. Oh, and then it started to come back, even in the tasting, and then it started to come back a little bit more. Yeah, it speaks perfectly to what the Ice Cream Man was bringing up earlier in today's episode.
Yep. So again, bottles are still on our website from our June 6th release, and we even have some of our rums left. A bit of Foursquare, a bit of our Thornton Kosher for Passover rum, which surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, you don't have to wait until Passover to drink it. You don't even have to be Jewish to drink it. You could just enjoy it as you like, whenever you like, responsibly.
Yeah. Hashtag please drink the whole bottle responsibly. And yeah, right. There's now, I think, back to what Nolan was saying before we got into the interview there. Having bottles on the website means if you're within a season, right, you want to make some rum cocktails with Single Cask Nation rums, they're on the website. Get them, send them to you. You want a bourbon cocktail? Well, we can hook you up with that as well.
There you go.
It's good. Good times. You mentioned a moment ago that we'd released 6.
Yes.
And that was that was a big number for us. One of the questions we've been hearing from the nation is, how do I plan? How do I plan my budget? How do I make sure I don't miss out, I don't overspend in the wrong place? To be clear, we're taking off the month of July. There will be no releases in July. We will go through the summer with some of the bundles sitting on the website. We will have some of the bottles available for purchase on the website. Once we get to August, we'll think about ramping up the offerings again and returning our attention to Scotchies to get us through the remainder of the year. And so continue to listen, continue to pay attention to the emails coming into your inbox. If you haven't signed up, if you've had fun listening to us, but we don't email you on a weekly basis, head over to singlecasknation.com, become a member, subscribe to the list, and let us keep you up to speed with what's happening. Shortly, we'll be talking some other global releases as well. But again, we're sitting back, we're enjoying the summer, we're enjoying Jess's 6th release that's working its way through global markets. And we've got the e-com sitting over here. More to talk about another day. This is a celebration of American spirit on the singlecasknation.com website for the summer.
Speaking of American spirits, I've got a little bit of the Westland Colare, Foro, the 4th edition, which is quite nice. I've been nosing and sipping on this as we've been talking.
Yeah, this was announced about 4 weeks ago.
Yep.
And we've actually been sitting on it.
It's been painful. Like you
ouch.
Just,
for a bit longer than that. It was Anna, our very dear friend Anna, from Westland, who was kind enough to share the liquid with us. And when I saw her in San Francisco earlier in May, she and I were tasting this together. And nice. I said, I'd love to taste this on the podcast with Joshua.
Yeah.
Given our love of Westland and our relationship with Westland. So this is, if you need a reminder at home, Colare fits within the Outpost range at Westland. And the Outpost range is focused on non-commercial barley varieties. And we are nosing right now a variety that I'm not sure when I might have had this, but this is Fritz barley type.
Huh. My refrigerator was on the Fritz last week. Does that have anything to do with this?
Isn't your refrigerator a Fritz Maytag?
I've run out of Fritz jokes. Like, how many Fritz jokes can you have?
So while you take a pause, I can tell you there are just over 3,000 bottles nationwide and aged for more than 5 years, predominantly, and this is worth returning to as a wee conversation piece, predominantly in refill Westland casks.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
With approximately 5% going into ex-bourbon barrels. But that's been a thing I think you and I have talked about for as long as there's been. I've got to be careful with my word choice here. American single malt has existed longer than you and I have known each other, so I will be careful here.
Yeah.
But in terms of American single malt as a rising category, I think part of the conversation you and I have had is look at Scotland, where yes, they're bringing in ex-bourbon casks, yes, they're bringing in ex-sherry casks, but they're also refilling into their own casks after they've been first used for bourbon or after they've been first used for sherry. And I think part of a natural evolution for a distillery is, what does it look like when you start filling into your own previously used casks? So to see Collaery here with a focus on Fritz, then having refill Westland wood with a small proportion of ex-bourbon going on into this this small batch here. Like, they're telling a Westland story here as much as they're telling a Fritz barley story here.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I actually, it's not for this episode because I want to go over what we're smelling and what we're tasting with this whiskey. But I think at some point there is a deeper conversation I want to have with you that goes along with something Dr. Matt Bishop doesn't like us to use, but this idea of a distillery's DNA and what casks can or cannot be doing to that signature flavor profile. But it's a deeper conversation I want to have at a later date.
Yeah. Does he not like us using DNA, or he was just looking for further explanation around our use of DNA? He's
a doctor, and he explained to us, you may have remembered, he sent us a portable document file that talked about what DNA is, and our use of it wasn't really fitting of how we were trying to use it.
That's wild. Wonderful oily texture on the Collaery. Absolutely tremendous mouthfeel. This would fit into that pale malt series of Westland distillates. No 5 malt here, no heavy chocolate malt going on in here. This is the Fritz shining through, presenting sweet grain.
Yeah.
Some pleasing sweet fruit in here. When I first stuck my nose in it, I got pear on the nose.
Okay, see. So I got that grain, right? And even hints of, like, if you were to pour out some dried malted barley and maybe some dust would come from that, just like a hint of like barley dust coming through. But I'm getting lemon bars, like warm lemon bars going on in the nose, which is really nice.
An obvious return to, for me, not just a go-to, but a return to, is plump dehydrated apricots.
Oh, there you go. On the nose?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and there's a little
that's
bit
really cracking, really inviting. Beautifully bright.
It's nice. There's a very subtle nuttiness going on. Like, if you were to separate out the little almond slivers from your Raisin Nut Bran cereal, you may get that in there.
I would have gone with the almond slivers on the top of a very lightly sugar-dusted, freshly baked croissant.
Oh, you had me at croissant.
You had me at melange.
You had me at Collaery.
The other week in LA, I ordered a pain au chocolat, which was clearly in their cabinet. and the woman rang me up for a chocolate croissant. And I walked away quietly, as I'm prone to do in my life, thinking to myself, it's not a chocolate croissant. It's a pain au chocolat. But I moved on with my day, Joshua.
Well, I think the person checking you out thought that you were a pain in the ass.
Pain in the asshole. All right, have you tasted it?
Yeah, I'm going to retaste it now. You know, before I was tasting it just to enjoy it. Now I want to discover some of these flavors here. So I'm going to give it a sip.
Yeah. I get this lingering pepperiness from it. And trying to pay attention, oak presence, bourbon presence, and refill cask presence on it. But just this nice little bit of warmth coming from that pepper as well, and then maybe collecting at the back of my throat. Moves from that fruity, bright opening nose into quite a hearty whiskey going across the palate, bringing in the oak spice, bringing in the pepper, still with the evolving malted barley note to it.
Yeah,
the barley remains present across the palate.
Yeah, no, I can't and won't disagree with you on any of that. I will say, however, I think the texture, rather than being oily, there's almost a creaminess to it, that sort of heft that you might get from a half and half. If you've ever taken that sip of a half and half, this sort of creamy almost, or like a good rich oat milk or something like that.
Yeah, see, for me, the texture is more like a nice, viscous, extra virgin olive oil.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I am now pouring another dram. Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah, it's really...
Tum.
It's quite...
Thanks again to Anna for sharing this. This was very kind of her.
Yeah, huge thanks. I would add in here some maybe some white peaches. A little bit of stone fruit
on the palate?
On the palate, yeah, on the palate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, not so much on the nose.
So you're still getting the fruit coming. Any citrus on the palate for you?
So the citrus was on the nose for me.
Right.
That pepperiness came through on the palate.
Agreed.
The peaches came through on the palate. The maltiness sort of really rose up. It's sweet malt. Like it's really... like not just sweet malt, but like sweetened malt, but not in a cloying way, just sweetened.
Oh my gosh. Oh, because we've visited there, I want to give them a shout out and really Dr. Steve and the team and Dr. Steve and the team of graduates over there were so lovely the day we met them. But this Fritz varietal hails from the Washington State University Bread Lab.
So this was a variety that they cultivated then?
Correct. Correct.
Look at
Right?
that. Man.
Right? Just like our backwoods with our Australian Heritage Rye. Whereas that was then brought to seed by a maltster.
Yeah.
Here you've got the work being done on Fritz by the WSU Bread Lab.
And this is why I like this use of refill Westland casks and some refill bourbon is they're really allowing that grain to shine through. They're not
100%.
masking it, right?
100%.
And that's evident.
Right, which is when you get to Gariana and you're looking at that Oregon oak and what that's doing, and that's a big presence. How do you present that in such a way that you're showing the oak, you're representing the oak, but you're not letting it run away with the entire enterprise?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think there's obviously care in everything Westland do, but Gariana, to my mind, presents a bigger challenge. This barley is just singing in this bottle. Really, really delectable, really delicious.
Yeah.
Thoroughly enjoying that one.
Yeah, we've been saying this. We've been bottling Westland now for 10 years. And we've known the folks at Westland for 11 or 12. And I think we've been saying this since then, is that Westland, plain and simple, are making world-class single malts that people need to pay attention to and need to embrace and shout about, because it's remarkably made whiskey. It just is.
100%. I'm just sitting here enjoying that liquid while you talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a relationship that means the world, and delicious. Absolutely delicious. Ah, all right.
Yeah. You got to pour extra. I only had a sample.
Yeah, sorry, man.
So I'm fresh out of liquid, Jason.
See, I had the benefit of traveling all the way to San Francisco to meet Anna, and happened to meet Anna while there. That time it was serendipitous. My James Saxon was a near miss. Anna got to actually spend some time with and chat with and catch up with, and it was
I'm jealous. Any time spent with Anna is time well spent.
She's a great person.
Yep, no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
We're going to get out of here by, once again, bringing all of these name checks full circle. I put in front of Daniel the statement that came from Chris Riesbeck in our time with him, and we put in front of James Saxon, and now we've got Daniel weighing in on it as well. And that question is, or maybe not that question, maybe that statement is experimentation is not the same as innovation. And I thought somebody with whom I'd been having an independent bottling conversation with and a blending conversation with might want to weigh in on it as well. So, as we've been doing, we will give the last word in the podcast to Daniel. But Joshua, you've already let the good listeners know if they want to email us, info@singlecastnation.com. I want to confirm that we did hear back from Rebecca. And Rebecca, I am still following through and sending you a Westland for rising to the challenge of dropping an email and being a first-time writer. That was absolutely wonderful. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to Daniel for his time and his hospitality. I'm not used to this portion of the show, so I'm getting nervous about the incomplete Joshua Hatton list. We thank the ice cream man for sending in his email. I also wish the listener could see how you are watching me right now.
This is delicious. This is absolutely delicious.
I'm torn between good luck fucking this up, Johnston Yellen, and why are you saying all the bits that I say at this portion of the podcast?
No, I've come to terms with that. I just want to watch you dig a hole.
I feel like I'm getting deeper and deeper over here. Thanks to Anna for being very kind and sharing the Caleri samples with us so that we could enjoy them on the podcast together. And thanks to you, Joshua, for all you do in making our podcast the community that it has become.
Couldn't do without you, Jason.
Well, thank you, my good sir. Let's throw it over to Daniel. Let's get the heck out of here, and we'll be back in another couple of weeks. Cheers, listeners.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. I'm back with Daniel Whittington.
Hey.
We're sitting on the Wizard Academy campus in the hill country of Austin.
That's right.
It's beautiful out here. I'm really loving this. I wanted to call you back here because we've been talking about Chris Riesbeck and James Saxon and blending.
Right.
And Chris Riesbeck uttered a sentence that we've kind of turned into a little thread through other episodes.
Bring it on.
And you talk and think in a way that I want to put this in front of you. Chris Riesbeck said,
experimentation is not the same as innovation.
100%.
Speaking about the whiskey world.
Yeah, 100%. Could not agree more.
And we're out.
Yeah.
Put some leaves on those branches.
Yeah.
for
Well,
us.
I'm going to come from the musician aspect, right?
Good.
Like the best producer and mixer of an album of all time did not invent the drum kit, did not even invent mixing. But they're going to take all the instruments you've known and heard of and thought you understood and maybe turn it into something you never could possibly have imagined.
Right.
They don't have to be an instrumentation innovator to pull that off. Radiohead used the same instruments, right, that Beck did. Right?
Yeah, I love that.
But guess what? They didn't produce anywhere near the same shit. B.B. King played the same guitar that Keith Richards did, right? Keith Richards has played, not always. Doesn't make him the same musician or the same product, right? Neither of them invented the guitar.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's rocking.
There we go.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
We're out of here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, cheers. It was a pleasure.
It's been a blast. Cheers, man. I'll see you again.
Yes, you will.